In Washington this week, a major shift in U.S. healthcare policy has taken shape, signaling what could be one of the most consequential deals in modern pharmaceutical history. The Trump administration has announced an agreement with two pharmaceutical giants, Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk, to lower the prices of popular weight loss and diabetes drugs, including the widely known medications Ozempic, Wegovy, and Mounjaro. The move, presented as a victory for American consumers and a landmark in healthcare affordability, has sparked intense debate across the political and economic spectrum. Supporters hail it as a breakthrough that could redefine the relationship between government and Big Pharma, while critics warn that the political motivations behind the deal may carry far-reaching implications for Medicare, private insurers, and the nation's broader drug pricing system. The announcement came as the administration unveiled plans to allow Medicare to directly negotiate prices for these drugs, a policy reversal that, until recently, was strongly opposed by many Republicans and by the pharmaceutical industry itself. The White House has positioned this as a consumer-first decision, emphasizing that millions of Americans struggling with obesity and diabetes will finally gain access to affordable treatment. For years, these drugs have been financially out of reach for most Americans, costing well over $1,000 a month without insurance coverage. Under the new arrangement, Medicare will be able to secure significant price reductions through direct negotiations with manufacturers, while private insurers are expected to follow suit under competitive market pressure. The roots of this policy shift go back to growing political pressure around the skyrocketing costs of healthcare and prescription drugs. Over the past decade, obesity has become one of the most urgent public health crises in the United States, affecting more than 100 million adults and costing the healthcare system an estimated $173 billion annually. Meanwhile, the explosion of demand for new GLP-1 drugs, once used primarily for diabetes, has turned them into billion-dollar assets for pharmaceutical companies. Wegovy and Mounjaro have seen record-breaking sales, with manufacturers struggling to meet demand. Yet, their high price tags have made them inaccessible to most Americans, creating a growing divide between those who can afford cutting-edge medical innovation and those who cannot. The Trump administration's deal aims to bridge that divide, leveraging the federal government's purchasing power to bring down prices in exchange for expanded access and guaranteed market stability for the manufacturers. For Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk, the agreement offers the opportunity to secure long-term revenue and avoid the threat of harsher government regulation. For the White House, it represents a political win that could resonate with middle-class voters heading into an election cycle where healthcare costs remain a top issue. Behind the scenes, sources familiar with the negotiations describe months of back and forth between pharmaceutical executives, policy advisors, and federal agencies. According to reports from CNN and CNBC, the talks intensified after Medicare's new drug price negotiation authority was finalized earlier this year. The administration's health policy team, led by the Department of Health and Human Services, prioritized the inclusion of obesity drugs under Medicare Part D, a controversial decision given that, until now, weight loss medications were largely excluded from federal coverage. In a surprising twist, the deal reportedly includes commitment from Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk to cap annual price increases and to expand domestic manufacturing to prevent shortages. These provisions are designed to reassure both consumers and lawmakers who fear that lower prices could lead to supply disruptions or reduced investment in future innovation. Political analysts see this move as part of a broader realignment in how Washington approaches healthcare reform. For decades, Republicans resisted Medicare price negotiation on the grounds that it interfered with free market principles. But the surging costs of essential drugs and the growing public demand for government intervention have pushed even conservative policymakers to rethink that stance. The Trump administration's decision, therefore, marks not just a policy pivot, but also a political one. It signals that cost-cutting measures once considered off-limits in Republican economic philosophy may now be seen as necessary in an era of populist politics and voter frustration over corporate power. Economists note that this agreement could have ripple effects throughout the healthcare system. If Medicare successfully secures lower prices for GLP-1 drugs, private insurers and employer health plans are likely to demand similar terms. That could reshape the entire pharmaceutical pricing landscape, potentially reducing profit margins for drug makers but expanding access for millions of patients. However, some experts caution that the short-term gains in affordability could be offset by longer-term market distortions. Pharmaceutical companies may respond by raising prices on other medications or slowing down research and development for less profitable drug categories. The Congressional Budget Office is expected to issue a detailed fiscal impact analysis in the coming months, estimating how the new pricing framework will affect federal spending and the national deficit. As the story continues to develop, attention is turning to how these changes will be implemented and whether the promised savings will truly reach consumers. Medicare's negotiation process is complex, and success will depend on how effectively federal officials can balance cost reductions with maintaining access and quality. Critics warn that, without strong oversight, pharmaceutical companies could find loopholes or delay compliance, undermining the intended benefits. Still, for millions of Americans struggling to afford life-changing medications, the deal represents a glimmer of hope in an increasingly costly healthcare landscape. Looking more broadly, this announcement highlights the changing political dynamics around healthcare policy in the United States. Drug pricing reform has long been a contentious issue, bridging economic, ethical, and ideological divides. Both parties have campaigned for lower prescription costs, yet meaningful action has been elusive. With this deal, the Trump administration appears to be seizing a rare bipartisan opportunity, appealing to voters on both sides of the aisle who have grown weary of corporate price gouging. Polling data over the past year shows that nearly 80% of Americans support federal intervention to reduce drug prices, including majorities of both Republicans and Democrats. That broad consensus gives the White House political cover to move forward, even if the deal draws criticism from traditional free market advocates. But the political calculation runs deeper. Weight loss drugs have become not only a health issue but also a cultural and economic phenomenon. Celebrities, tech entrepreneurs, and social media influencers have driven demand, creating what analysts call a status symbol medicine, a treatment once marketed for diabetes that has now become synonymous with lifestyle transformation. As a result, access to these medications has taken on social and political significance. For a president eager to project empathy toward middle-class Americans, tackling the affordability of these drugs carries both symbolic and strategic weight. Lowering the cost of Mounjaro and Wegovy could be framed as an effort to democratize access to modern healthcare and to relieve financial burdens on working families. However, critics argue that the timing of the announcement is no coincidence. With the 2026 election season on the horizon, they suggest the administration is using the deal as a political tool to gain favor with voters concerned about rising living costs. Democratic lawmakers, while supportive of lower drug prices, have raised questions about whether the plan will rely too heavily on voluntary cooperation from pharmaceutical companies rather than enforceable regulation. Some have pointed out that earlier initiatives to reduce insulin costs or cap out-of-pocket expenses have produced mixed results, with insurers and manufacturers finding ways to shift costs elsewhere in the system. Progressive policy groups are urging Congress to strengthen oversight and ensure that savings from the deal are passed directly to consumers, not absorbed by intermediaries in the healthcare supply chain. Meanwhile, Wall Street has been watching closely. Following the announcement, shares of Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk initially dipped but quickly stabilized as investors interpreted the agreement as a long-term stability play rather than a short-term loss. Analysts predict that lower margins per dose could be offset by substantially higher volumes as the drugs become available to a wider patient base. Market watchers also note that by participating in the deal, the companies may have positioned themselves to fend off potential competitors and maintain brand dominance for years to come. From a policy standpoint, the mechanics of the deal raise complex questions about how Medicare will determine fair pricing. The agency is expected to base its negotiations on a combination of production costs, market demand, and comparative international pricing. Advocates of the plan argue that this data-driven approach will prevent arbitrary price caps and encourage ongoing innovation, while skeptics worry it could inadvertently discourage competition. International observers are also paying attention, since U.S. drug prices often set benchmarks for global markets. If America succeeds in forcing down costs for GLP-1 drugs, other nations could leverage similar strategies, potentially reshaping the economics of the global pharmaceutical industry. For patients, however, the immediate focus is far simpler: whether this will actually make their prescriptions affordable. According to Kaiser Family Foundation data, fewer than 1 in 5 Americans who could benefit from GLP-1 drugs currently take them, largely because of price. For seniors on fixed incomes, even partial coverage under Medicare could represent a life-changing improvement in quality of life. Physicians, too, are cautiously optimistic. The American Medical Association released a statement praising the move as a step toward aligning medical access with modern treatment standards, while calling for broader inclusion of obesity-related therapies in public insurance programs. In the months ahead, implementation will determine the true legacy of this policy. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services will have to negotiate contracts, monitor compliance, and establish safeguards against shortages. If the process succeeds, it could serve as a blueprint for future drug negotiations, not only for obesity drugs, but for cancer treatments, Alzheimer's medications, and other high-cost therapies that strain both public and private budgets. Conversely, if the rollout falters, it could fuel skepticism about the government's ability to manage complex healthcare interventions and give ammunition to critics who see the policy as politically motivated rather than economically sound.